Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So great to see such a wonderful turnout. This is the third event in our Wellbeing Academy series, where we bring together industry and academic thought leaders in the consumer well-being space. So before we invite our keynote speaker for today, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to give a brief introduction to Joy Ventures. We are a startup studio working with founders and innovators to build and support companies that are developing consumer products for well-being, or simply products that help people feel good. We have a special operating model, which is aimed at fostering this young category. And it's based on three main pillars. We invest in existing startups across various stages and all over the world, providing them with strategic support throughout their journey to market, both by our in-house team as well as a global network of partners and experts. We currently have 5 portfolio companies, soon to be 7. We also run innovation programs that bring people together from various backgrounds and disciplines into our domain to help them generate new ideas, explore new product concepts, and to ultimately work on building new ventures from the ground up. We have a new entrepreneur in residence program platform where we support founders on their journey to build new companies, and we provide them also with the essential resources on their journey through discovery and initial development, all the way to actually launching their new venture with the potential investment from Joy. And finally, last but not least, we've also developed a very deep relationship with academia, which is aimed at advancing research and technology development that can contribute to future product innovation. We run an academic grant program, and we funded 36 projects to date. So you may be asking, especially if you're new to Joy and to the space, why consumer products for well-being? Well, to us, it's very clear that there's never been a greater time, a greater need and demand for products that improve our well-being, products that help us take a break during the day, during our stressful lives, to relax, unwind, refocus, connect with others, and really just feel good. But as we see it, we think that the product landscape is still very much in its infancy. And we see a huge opportunity to bring new products to this fast-growing market. When we talk about demand, even before the COVID pandemic hit the global economy, consumers around the world were starting to already adopt well-being tech, turning to new products and trends in the health and wellness industry. We've seen the rise of first-generation products such as Headspace and Calm, which I'm sure everybody knows, which even recently reached unicorn status. And as you can imagine, in current times, the search for solutions has significantly increased. There are really many drivers that are contributing to demand growth. Some of them that I'll mention, for example, the fact that the millennial generation is one of the most stressed out generations. They spend a quarter of their disposable income on wellness, and they're very interested in experience for self-improvement. There's obviously a global upswing altogether in stress and anxiety, as well as loneliness. There are many new technologies that are now available that can enable various types of experiences, whether it's mixed reality, everything to do with remote connection, robotics, various stimulation type technologies, all that are out there that can enable these types of products. And just one final trend is very much the fact that the whole topic of emotional health, emotional wellness, what may have been less of a popular conversation topic is now really becoming such a core part of our cultural conversation, and really it empowers people to talk more about that and to seek out more solutions for just feeling better and not being ashamed of saying, okay, I'm stressed out, or feeling a little bit down and need something to help me feel good. So these are some of the drivers that we see that are, you can see some of these numbers showing the really significant demand and market size that's already projected for the coming years. So today, consumers, a little bit more about sort of the demand side, consumers really across all the age groups are increasingly making purchasing decisions through sort of the prism of well-being. And they're looking to see how well-being can be infused really into every aspect of their life, whether it's work or travel or home. They're really trying to incorporate various aspects of well-being into their daily lives. So if you look at physical, mental, environmental, emotional, social, all of these different components of our daily lives are really driving our level of well-being. And so you can imagine all the different areas where we can focus and where we can innovate new products that can help people feel good. So I hope I've proven to you that demand is high. And while the demand is still high, we really see at Joy that the product landscape is still in its very early days. We're looking to advance the next generation of products that can really further address consumers' diverse lifestyles, needs, and sentiments. We want to look for products that create meaningful impact on their users, products that will really become part of the users' lives. So we still see a huge opportunity to leverage new and emerging technologies to create these types of experience that can positively impact our well-being. You may be wondering about some more examples. If you're not familiar with this space, one way that you can learn a little bit more is to visit our website and learn a little bit about our own portfolio companies who are addressing a diverse number of needs in their own unique ways, whether it's addressing our need to manage stress, increase focus, sleep better, achieve running or meditation goals. These are just good examples, but several only examples of well-being products in the consumer space. So I hope that's given you a good idea of what Joy is all about and why we're here. And I want to conclude by inviting you to join us to learn more. I want to suggest that now is the time to launch a well-being startup. And if you are in that place where this might be of interest to you, whether you've got a startup already or whether you have an idea or just looking to connect with people who want to do something in this space, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to get to know you and see how we can support you. So thank you very much for tuning in. You're welcome to send us an email to ideas@joyventures.com. And now, without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Nir Eyal. Nir writes, consults, and teaches about the intersection of psychology, technology, and business, and previously taught as a lecturer in marketing at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford. He co-founded and sold 2 tech companies since 2003. He is the author of 2 best-selling books, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. Nir is also an active investor in habit-forming technologies. Some of his past investments include Eventbrite, Anchor.fm, Kahoot, and Canva. So I'll let Nir take it from here and invite you all to write your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to them at the end of Nir's talk. So Nir, thank you very much, and looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much, Mili. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Give me just 1 second to pull up my slides. And can you just confirm for me that you can see the first slide there? Does that look good, Mili?
Yes, indeed.
All right, perfect, perfect. So welcome everyone. It's such an honor to talk to you today about how to build habit-forming products, because as we all have seen over the past several years, these devices that we all carry around with us today can have a profound impact on our day-to-day lives. And so what we want to do for the next few minutes is to understand how these products and services, these household names that we all use every day, these companies that started, most of them, a decade or so ago, how is it that these companies, the companies that have touched the lives of hundreds of millions, if not billions of users, How have they changed consumer habits? And in the process, of course, made hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And so who am I talking about here? Who are the usual suspects? Well, it's companies like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Snapchat, whether it's enterprise web or consumer web. We find that there is a huge number of companies who are using the psychology of designing for habits to help get users hooked. And so what we want to do is to understand the patterns behind how they do what they do, not for their benefit. The reason that I wrote this book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, was not for the big tech companies, right? I don't care if they use it. That's where I learned these techniques. That's where I stole these techniques. And my idea was to democratize them so that the rest of us can use these techniques for good, that we can all use habits to help people live happier, healthier, more connected, more productive lives. But what is a habit? Let's start with the definition. A habit is an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. This is not the same thing as an addiction. I can always tell when someone hasn't read my book when they say, oh, you're that guy who wrote that book about addiction. The book is not called How to Build Addictive Products. The book is called How to Build Habit-Forming Products, because unlike an addiction, which is always bad and unethical to do to people, a habit can be very good, right? We want to build habits in people's lives because habits can be used to help people live happier, healthier, more connected, more productive lives by getting them to use a product, not just because they feel like they have to, but because fundamentally they feel like they want to. And so over the past several years, Amelia mentioned some of my investment portfolio, companies like Canva, Kahoot, Fitbod, these companies that are using behavioral design tactics described in this methodology I'm about to share with you to help. For example, Kahoot is a $1.5 billion company out of Norway that helps get kids hooked onto online education. Fitbod gets people hooked to exercise. We can build all kinds of products using the exact same psychology that Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp all use, not just for frivolous time wasters, but to help people live better lives. And that's why I was so happy to be invited by Joy to give this presentation today. So let's dive right in. How do we build a habit-forming product? We have to design into the product experience what's called a hook. A hook is an experience designed to connect the user's problem with your product with enough frequency to form a habit. Let me say that again. A hook is defined as an experience that connects your user's problem to your product with enough frequency to form a habit. And it's through successive cycles through these hooks that our preferences are shaped, our tastes are formed, and that these habits take hold. So I'm not going to be able to cover everything in the book. We only have a few minutes, and so I wanted to give you a high-level overview. There's, of course, a lot more depth in the book as well, but I wanted to give you at least the overview of what these hooked models look like so you can integrate them in your own products and services. Every hook has 4 basic steps: a trigger, an action, a reward, and finally an investment. And so we're going to start with step 1, the trigger. A trigger is defined as something that prompts us to action. It tells us what to do next. And there are 2 kinds of triggers. The first kind of trigger is what we call an external trigger. An external trigger you'll be very familiar with. This is something in our outside environment that gives us some piece of information for what to do next. The pings, the dings, the rings, anything in our outside environment that gives us information for what to do next. Now, you know all about these external triggers. If you're in the product design community, you build these every day. As a consumer, you use them all the time. But from a habit formation perspective, external triggers are not as important as what we call the internal triggers. Internal triggers are things that prompt us to action, but where the information for what to do is not outside of us, but rather stored as a memory or an association inside our own heads. So what we do when we're around certain people, partaking in certain routines, in certain places, situations, and most frequently when we experience certain emotions, prompts us to action, prompts us to do these behaviors with little or no conscious thought. Now, the most frequently occurring internal triggers are these emotions, but not just any emotion. They are specifically negative emotions, negative emotions, what we do when we're feeling bored or lonesome or lost or indecisive or fatigued or lonely, or what we do when we experience these uncomfortable emotional states prompts us to look for relief from that emotional discomfort. One of the studies that showed us that this is the case came to us from a study that found that people suffering from clinical depression check email more. Now, why would that be? Why would people suffering from clinical depression check email more? It turns out that people suffering from clinical depression experience what we call negative valence states. They feel down more frequently than the rest of the population. And what do they do to boost their mood, to be taken out of that negative valence state? They check their devices. They go online. They look at email more often than the rest of the population. But of course, if we're honest with ourselves, we don't have to be clinically depressed to have this phenomenon occur. All of us check our devices and use every product or service to escape some kind of emotional discomfort. Let me ask you, what website or app do people check when they're feeling lonely? For many people, it's Facebook, of course. And what about when you're feeling unsure about something? Before you check your brain to see if you know the answer, what are you doing? You're Googling it, of course, with little or no conscious thought. And what about when you're bored? You know, between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there's that big project you don't want to work on right now. What do? You watch YouTube videos, you check Reddit, you look at the news, stock prices, sports scores. Lots of products and services cater to this uncomfortable emotional trigger of boredom. We don't like that sensation of boredom, and so we look for escape from that emotional discomfort. So what's the lesson here? What's the takeaway? If you are building the kind of product that needs a habit, that needs unprompted user engagement, you want people to come to your product, not because of some spammy marketing, not because of expensive advertising, but you want people to use your product on their own because they want to, not because they have to. You have got to be able to articulate what is that internal trigger. I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with over the years who build these amazing expensive products and they tell me all the whiz bang things they can do, all the technology that went into it. But when I ask them, okay, but what is the internal trigger? What's the psychological itch that your product is addressing? They don't have a clue. They can't tell me. And so if you need to build a habit with your consumer, if you can't articulate that internal trigger, you're flying blind. You're just hoping to get lucky. You've got to be able to articulate what is that psychological itch and does it occur with sufficient frequency to build a habit around. The next step of the hook is the action phase. The action phase is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. The simplest thing the user can do to get relief from that psychological itch. Let me show you a few habit-forming products, and I want you to see how simple that action is. Something as simple as a scroll on Pinterest, a quick search on Google, or what could be simpler than pushing the play button on YouTube. These incredibly simple behaviors done in anticipation of an immediate reward. Now, it turns out there's actually a formula to help us predict the likelihood of these singular behaviors. It comes to us from a researcher by the name of BJ Fogg, who I knew very well at Stanford. And Fogg tells us that for any human behavior, we need 3 things at the same time. We need sufficient motivation, sufficient ability. Ability is how easy or difficult the behavior is to do. And the T stands for a trigger. We just talked all about triggers. So let's explore motivation and ability. Motivation is the energy for action, how much we want to do a particular behavior. And all of us, all human beings respond to these 6 levers of motivation because all of us, we seek pleasure, we avoid pain. We seek hope, we avoid fear. We seek social acceptance, we avoid social rejection. So every bit of ad copy, every television commercial, every billboard fundamentally manipulates these 6 levers of motivation to make people more or less likely to do a particular behavior. That's the M in B equals MAT. The A stands for ability. Ability is the capacity to do a particular action, how easy or difficult something is to do. And of course, the easier something is to do, the more likely people are to do it. This is called Lewin's equation. It's been a consumer psychology pillar for decades. There are these 6 factors of ability that we can utilize to make people more or less likely to do a behavior based on how much time something takes, how much money something costs, how much physical effort is required to do something. Brain cycles. This is a big one when it comes to technology products, because the harder something is to understand, the less likely people are to do that behavior. Social deviance says that we become more likely to do something when we see someone else like us doing it. And finally, non-routine says that we become more likely to do something simply for the fact that we have done it before in the past. And this is why habits are so important, because the more we do something, the easier it becomes and the more likely we are to do it again in the future. What's that called? It's called practice. The more we do it, the easier it gets, the more likely we are to do it again in the future. So we can actually conceptualize these three elements of B equals MAT on this graph. And so if you're designing an experience, right, an amazing new website, an unbelievable app, even a physical experience, but darn it, people aren't doing what you have designed for them to do. They're not taking the action you intended. There are only three reasons why. Either the user lacks motivation on the y-axis there, high motivation, low motivation. The x-axis, ability. If something is very easy to do, it's on the far right. If something is very difficult to do, it's on the far left. And if the user has sufficient motivation and sufficient ability, they cross that red threshold. And if and only if the trigger is present, the behavior will occur every time. Online, offline, enterprise web, consumer web, your behavior, your kids' behaviors, your customers' behaviors always require these three basic elements: motivation, ability, and a trigger every single time. Every click, every action, every purchase. If the behavior isn't occurring, it's only because of one of these three things. For the sake of time, let's move on to the third step of the Hoooked model, the reward phase. The reward phase is where the user gets what they came for, where their itch is scratched, right? Where the reward comes into play. Now, there is a way to supercharge desire, that there's actually a way that you can manufacture wanting, manufacture desire. Does anybody want to know how you can manufacture desire? Is anybody curious? I'm doing it to you right now. So when I took that long pause and I stopped talking for a second and I asked you a question, many of you perked up. What's he going to say? What's the answer? Why did he stop talking? What I did was to implement what's called an intermittent reinforcement, because what we know is that the unknown is fascinating. This is called a variable reward. This came out of the work of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning. He did these famous experiments where he put pigeons in what today we call a Skinner box, and he gave these pigeons a little disc to peck at. And every time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward, a little food pellet. And at first, Skinner could feed the pigeon a food pellet and train it to peck at the disc every time. Now, a very interesting observation that few people remember about this study is that Skinner starved his pigeons, that the pigeons would not peck at the disc unless they were hungry. In the exact same way that it doesn't matter what rewards mechanisms you make for your customers, for your users, if the user doesn't have the internal trigger, if they're not hungry for it, if they don't really want it, you cannot make them do something they themselves don't want to do. But if the pigeon was hungry, they would peck at the disc and receive the reward. Great, that's called operant conditioning. You've probably done something similar with your puppy at home or maybe your kids, that we respond to these incentives. Now, one day Skinner observed something a little different. You see, one day he made a mistake and he forgot to bring enough of these food pellets to the lab. So he didn't have enough of these food pellets to give as a reward, and he couldn't afford to give a food pellet every time the pigeon pecked at the disc. So he started giving away the food pellets every once in a while. So sometimes the pigeon would peck at the disc, no reward, no food pellet. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. But Skinner observed, to his amazement, is that the rate of response, the number of times these pigeons pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. Why does this happen? because variability stimulates this wanting, this craving reflex. It manufactures desire. And what you will find in all sorts of products that capture our attention, that have this effect of engaging us and form habits, you will find one or more of these three types of variable rewards: rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. Let me introduce these to you briefly. The first is called rewards of the tribe. Rewards of the tribe are all about this search for variability, things that have this element of surprise, but come from other people. Best example online is the search for empathetic joy, partnership, cooperation, competition, all things that feel good, come from other people, and have this element of variability. Best example online is, of course, social media. What makes Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Snapchat and all these apps so engaging is the uncertainty around what did people post? How many likes does something get? What are the comments going to say? High degree of variability around rewards of the tribe. The next is the search for resources, what I call rewards of the hunt. Now, this stems from our primal search for material possessions, food, shelter, clothing, these types of things. But in modern society, we buy these things with money. So when people think of variable rewards, oftentimes they think about slot machines, they think about gambling, where the variable reward is the uncertainty of playing one of these games of chance, right? Nobody turns away from a rolling slot machine. We want to see what we might win when we play one of these games. And the exact same dynamic is at work online. Have you noticed how everything today seems to have a feed? Have you noticed that, right? Instagram has it, Facebook has it, all these products. Why does everything have a feed? Even LinkedIn, right? This is a product that caters to business people. Why does LinkedIn have a feed? Well, let's take a look. When you scroll on LinkedIn, well, the first thing's not that interesting. The second story is not that interesting, but oh, maybe that third story is going to be interesting. And what do you have to do to get more of that interesting content? Just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, just like pulling on the handle of a slot machine. The last type of variable reward is called rewards of the self. And rewards of the self are all about the search for self-achievement. These are things that feel good in and of themselves. They're intrinsically pleasurable. These are things that, despite not having a social reward or any kind of material benefit, this is all about the search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control. The best example online is gameplay. So if somebody plays Angry Birds or Candy Crush, you're not necessarily playing with somebody else, but there's something fun about getting to the next level, the next accomplishment, the next achievement. And I know everybody watching today, all of you, you're very serious business people. None of you play these video games online, right? Well, I bet you play this game every day. Does this look familiar? Your email inbox, that unread message that you have to just open to clear it away. This is an example of rewards of the self, the search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control. The lesson here around variable rewards is to give users what they came for, to scratch their itch, and yet have this element of variability and uncertainty that leaves them wanting more. And finally, the last step of the hook is what we call the investment phase. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product for some kind of future benefit, not about immediate gratification, but a future reward. The point of the investment phase is to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook. And it does this in two ways. The first way is by loading the next trigger. Loading the next trigger involves something the user does to bring themselves back. Okay, not some piece of spammy marketing that you send me, but something that I did to bring myself back. What does that look like? Let's say you use WhatsApp or Slack or any number of other messaging platforms. When you send someone that message, you don't get any immediate gratification, right? What's the reward you get from sending someone a message? There's no points, there's no badges, there's no leaderboard, nothing really happens. What you're doing is you are loading the next trigger because you're likely to get a reply. And what does that reply come with? It comes with that notification that you see there. That's an example of, do you remember, the external trigger that prompts you through the hook once again. So the first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is by loading the next trigger. The second way is by storing value. Storing value is a really, really big deal because as opposed to everything in the physical world, everything made out of atoms opposed to bits. Things in the physical world depreciate. They lose value with wear and tear. So your clothing, that's furniture, everything in the physical world with wear and tear loses value. It depreciates. But habit forming products can do the opposite. They can appreciate in value. They get more and more valuable the more we interact with them. And they do this because of this principle that I call stored value. What does stored value look like? The more content someone uploads to Google Drive or Dropbox, the more valuable the service becomes. The more data you give a company, for example, Mint.com, a personal finance software, Pinterest, Facebook, any of these companies, the more data you give them, the better the product becomes as your service made just for you based on your data. And if you were to log into my account, for example, on Pinterest or Facebook, it wouldn't be that interesting for you because it's all been based on the data that I've given these companies. Followers, the more followers somebody has, the better the product becomes for them. So if tomorrow Twitter were to say, hey, you know what? Twitter's not free anymore, okay? You're gonna have to start paying for Twitter now. Who's more likely to pay Twitter? Is it gonna be someone with 10 followers or with 10,000 followers? Of course, it's gonna be a person with 10,000 followers because they've stored all that value in the form of their follower count. And finally, reputation. Reputation is a form of stored value that users can literally take to the bank, because my reputation on Upwork, eBay, and Airbnb is defined based on my reputation. I can take this value to the bank. And so this brings me to the cold, hard conclusion that it's not the best product that wins, right? That we've all been told, I think, this lie in the product development community that just make the best product, right? Build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path down your door. I don't think that's true. I think that building a great product and having a great technology is table stakes. Everybody's got great technology. That's the base level that you need. The product that wins is the product that can capture the monopoly of the mind. The first to mind solution is the one that wins. The companies that integrate the hook model into their businesses, starting with the trigger, the action, the reward, investment, this is how preferences are shaped. This is how tastes are formed and how habits take hold. So the most important slide of the presentation is this one, these 5 fundamental questions that you have to be able to answer if you are building a habit forming product. Number 1, what is the internal trigger that the product is addressing? Number 2, what's the external trigger that prompts the user to action? What's the simplest behavior done in anticipation of reward? Is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And then finally, what's the bit of work done to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook? Now, before I take some questions, there's one more thing I feel obliged to address, which is, of course, the morality of manipulation. You know, some of you during this presentation, I'm sure were thinking to yourself, you know, is this okay to do to people? Is this kosher to use their hidden psychology to get people to do things we want them to do? And if that was on your mind, I say bravo, kol hakavod. That's exactly what you should be thinking, because look, designing products to change people's behavior is a form of manipulation. In fact, all design, interaction design, usability design, interior design, graphic design, it is all behavioral manipulation. Now, that doesn't necessarily make it bad, because there are 2 kinds of manipulation. There is persuasion, which is helping people do things they want to do. And then on the other extreme is coercion, getting people to do things they don't want to do. Persuasion is wonderful. If we can manipulate people into exercising more, being more productive at work, connecting with loved ones, whatever the case might be, saving money, wonderful. Let's manipulate them to help them do the things they themselves want to do, but for lack of good product design, they don't do. That is perfectly ethical. The other extreme is coercion, getting people to do things they don't want to do. The key word there, the difference between persuasion and coercion, is one word: regret. If people regret using your product, they will not use it for long, and they will tell other friends not to use your product either. So we have to make sure we use these techniques responsibly, because look, these are the products we take to bed with us every night before we even say hello to our loved ones. It's the first thing we reach for in the mornings. And so we have to ask ourselves, what responsibility do we have as product designers, as engineers, as entrepreneurs? What responsibility do we have to use this knowledge for good? I encourage you to use these techniques to help people find meaning in their lives, to engage them in something important, to improve the world by building the change that you wish to see in the world. And with that, I'd love to take some questions, but I have a very quick favor before we do that. If you could be so kind as to go to this URL, opinion2.us, you can just go on your computer there and type in opinion2.us, not .com, opinion2.us. Or if you have a phone handy, you can point your camera at that QR code and it'll take you to a website where you have a very, very quick survey, just 5 questions. Would love to know what you thought of the presentation. I read everybody's comments, so please let me know what you thought. I'm constantly improving it based on your feedback. And if you click submit into that survey, you will be given a link to my SlideShare page where you can have all the slides you just saw. There's also, if you happen to work in the enterprise field, right? I know that many of the examples that I showed you were consumer web products, Facebook and Instagram, right? If you work in enterprise versus consumer web, there's another presentation that you can look into that's called Hooked in the Enterprise. Same exact model, same exact 4 steps, but all the examples are for enterprise companies. So check that out as well. And if we don't get time to answer your question, feel free to reach out to me there at my website or on Twitter. My website is Nir and Far, Nir spelled like my first name, N-I-R, and far.com. There's a tab there that says contact, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions that we don't get to today. And with that, thank you so much and looking forward to your questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nir. That was really very inspiring. We're going to let people start typing in their questions. In the meantime, I'm curious. So say we're going on this product development journey and we want to basically implement your model. How do we start? Like when in the process do we start this? And who on the team gets involved in that?
Sure. So, okay. So let me answer the second question first. Anyone who touches the product, that's who should get involved with this. Anybody who touches the product should understand the hook model and be able to very quickly tell us trigger, action, reward, investment. This is the habit we're going for. Your first question around when is the best time to implement the hook model, there are 2 times that are particularly helpful to implement the hook model. The first is the very early days. So if you can utilize the hook model when your idea is still a pencil sketch, that's a great time because you haven't committed any code, you haven't hired a designer. If you can sit down and answer these 5 fundamental questions before you get going, that's a terrific time. So that's what happened to me 5 years ago, actually, when I got a phone call. I do these weekly office hours, which, by the way, anybody can book right there on my website. I do 15-minute calls with people who have read my books and just have any questions. So 5 years ago, a guy by the name of Johan called me and said, I have this idea for an education company. We're going to call it Kahoot. And here's our hook model. And I said, wow, this is a brilliant idea. And he kind of walked me through his steps and he hadn't built very much around it. And so that was a terrific experience because I could kind of help them a little bit on that and then later invest in the company. That's a great time to use the hook model, very, very early stage. The other place that the hook model is very useful is as a diagnostic tool. So in Silicon Valley, they call me the plumber because I plug up the leaks. Right? In Silicon Valley, we have a lot of businesses that we call leaky buckets. What are leaky buckets? Leaky buckets are businesses that VCs have dumped a bunch of money into. The company spends that money to buy users, right? Anybody can buy growth, right? You don't need to growth hack. You just buy users. You buy Facebook ads, you buy Google ads, you buy billboards, you buy television commercials. You can buy growth. What you can't buy is engagement and retention. You can't buy that. It has to be built into the product. So where I come in as the plumber to plug up these leaks of leaky buckets where users come in and leak out is we use the hook model as a diagnostic tool. And we say to ourselves, where is the hook model deficient? Is the internal trigger not well defined? Is the external trigger not clear? Is the action too difficult? Is the variable reward not rewarding? Or is the investment not asking people to invest in the service properly? Where is the problem? And so we use that as a diagnostic tool to figure out the symptoms so that we can cure the disease.
Great. So a lot of the questions are starting to come in. So we'll try to start shooting them your way and hopefully get to as many of them as we can. So you gave some very popular examples throughout your talk, social media examples and other very common tools that we all use throughout the day. Can you give a more like non-obvious example, something that's not as straightforward, like an example of a product that you can kind of talk about that maybe we wouldn't think is necessarily kind of met all the hooked.
Well, give me a product, Amelia. Maybe there's a product that you use that you find you're habituated to and you're not sure why. Are there any products that you find yourself using with little or no conscious thought?
There's a crossword app that I use. So I think that one is, probably there's the self, achievement piece, I guess. And
yeah, let's do that.
I don't know what the internal trigger is because I wake up in the morning and, or what's the trigger? There's no notification, there's nothing, but something that I like to do every day as part of a routine that I have.
Yeah, this is a great example. So one of my clients is the New York Times, that one of their most engaging features of this newspaper that devotes millions of dollars to reporting what's happening around the world is their crossword. Why? What's the internal trigger? The internal trigger is boredom. People hate boredom. There was a wonderful study done at Harvard by Timothy Wilson, where they connected people to a band that they told them would administer an electrical shock. Okay, they told them this will hurt, this electrical shock. All you have to do is sit in this room with this button in your hand that if you push the button will administer an electrical shock to your wrist. All you have to do is sit in this room. That's all you have to do. 60% of men, 30% of women, they could not sit with themselves in silence and they felt they would rather shock themselves than to be bored. Boredom is a serious, painful internal trigger. And people have been trying to find ways to satiate boredom since time immemorial. Facebook didn't invent, these solutions. There's all kinds of products out there forever. Some people like to read, some people like to watch sports, some people like to do crossword puzzles. The internal trigger is boredom. So that could be one of them. There might be others as well. The action is to start the puzzle, right? Just open the app and look at the puzzle. The variable reward is, what's the clue? Is it hard? Is it easy? Oh, there's one I got right away, right? That's the variable reward, right? It's about competency, mastery, rewards of the self, like we talked about earlier. The investment is, and crosswords are a perfect example of this, the more you do the crossword, the more you invest in it, right? Because you did, 7 down and you invested because now you have a letter that can help you with 6 across. And so the more you do, the more you invest. Now, the problem in the old days was that you did a crossword, you tossed it out, you were done. Well, now we have apps that say, Miri, you know what you did? Last time you did level 6. How about level 7? Right? So you invested that skill, that data that told a company, here's how good Miri is. Let's see if we can challenge her to see if she can do a little better. And so that data, that accrual of, oh, you know what, it's too hard or it's too easy. They're learning from you if they're doing it well to give you the right challenge at the right time to prompt you the next time when you feel bored. And your particular flavor of alleviating that boredom is with an intellectual stimulation, is with this crossword puzzle. It's wonderful. Now it becomes part of your day-to-day life. And you said something very interesting. Even if they don't send you the external trigger, even if they don't prompt you or ping you or ding you, you still have that habit of doing it with little or no conscious thought without the external trigger. It's an internal trigger.
Right. So I don't necessarily know my internal trigger consciously. How does a company that's developing a product actually know that someone has that they're actually addressing someone's internal trigger?
Yeah.
It's basically a hypothesis, I guess, that you have to prove somehow.
That's right. So that you never go out and ask your customer, hey, what's your internal trigger? They will have no idea what the heck you're talking about. So what we do, there's a few different techniques. One is we look for what we call nascent behaviors, right? We look for behaviors that people have been doing offline that haven't been brought online. So typically what we want to do is ask ourselves where people are currently satisfying this itch, right? Where do they go today? And if you say, oh, there is nothing that satisfies this itch, that's actually a bad thing, right? Many entrepreneurs that I talk to, they're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they tell me, oh, this problem has never been solved before. well, that's typically a bad thing. I want to see that it's solved before, but in a way that you can solve better, right? So look for existing habits. A second thing that we can do is called the 5 whys technique. And this came out of the Toyota production system, where what we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves why someone uses a product, but we don't just stop with the surface level. Most people, especially engineers, when you ask them, well, why would somebody use your product? Well, because we do multivariate, blah, blah, blah. This is this and VR that and AR that. They tell you all the technical solutions. That's why. Deeper. Why? Why would they want that? Why would they want that? Why would you want that? Until we get to an emotion. Once we get to the emotion, now we know what we're talking about. And it has to be a negative emotion, not a positive emotion. It's always a negative emotion.
Thanks. I wonder if there's a difference when you're talking about physical products versus digital products or apps. So obviously it's very different or very obvious in a way to many of us that we're already, attached to this thing all day long, or to, we're in front of our screens. What are some of the, you think, kind of unique things to think about within your model or in general when it comes to trying to get people hooked on physical products?
So physical products should have a huge advantage because there's a physical manifestation, right? There's the product itself is the external trigger. So, if you're building an app on someone's phone, if you're not on the home screen, if you're on page 2, 3, or 4, you might as well not even exist. They're not going to remember you exist. So physical products have the advantage of that physical space. So I'll give you a great example. I had a client come to me who was a pharmaceutical company who had this amazing drug that was an asthma prevention medication. Okay, so it was an inhaler that people who suffer from asthma had to take twice a day, not when they felt an attack, but to prevent an attack. And they had the hardest time getting people into the habit of remembering to take a puff in the morning and a puff at night. And so they came to me and they had spent, I'm not exaggerating, they had spent millions of dollars creating a smart inhaler with all this amazing technology that beeped and buzzed and reminded you and coordinated with an app to track and to leaderboards and points and badges and gamified. None of it worked. You know what worked? Nir, we built a stand, okay, a plastic stand that cost us 20 cents. And we told people, don't put your inhaler in your bag, okay? Because that was the habit people were in. If you have asthma, you keep your inhaler in your purse or your backpack. But that's not how you use this. We told them, instead of putting it in your backpack, use this little plastic stand and put it near a toothbrush. Because people brush their teeth first thing in the morning and last thing at night. And so before you go to bed or before first thing when you wake up, you take a puff next to your toothbrush. So the physical manifestation of the product itself became the external trigger. We didn't even need the app. We didn't need the technology. We just needed a really good external trigger.
Thank you. I'm looking through, there's so many great questions here. I'm trying to think of the ones that'll be relevant for as many people as possible. So I think one interesting question is, obviously we may all experience boredom, or we may all experience a certain negative emotion, but we'll react to different kinds of solutions, right? So you mentioned obviously ability on the one hand and motivation, but how do you actually take into account the fact that each and every one of us reacts differently to, you create a product that you want to address a large segment, but individual differences.
Sure. So this is a market sizing question. So clearly, many people, everybody has experienced boredom, but the way I satisfy boredom, the way I scratch that itch might be completely different from how you scratch that itch. So maybe you would do a crossword puzzle. Maybe I would check the news, or somebody else would watch a football game, or who knows what. So that's about taste and preferences. And so that's a question of what is the total addressable market, which is something that every VC looks for. Do enough people scratch that itch with your potential solution? Does that actually solve the problem for a sufficiently large number of people? And so where the hook model is helpful, it doesn't negate the process of lean startup methodologies. I'm sure everybody's heard of Lean Startup by Eric Ries. If you haven't read the book, wonderful book. And basically what Ries talks about is, instead of waterfall which is the way we used to build software, more than a decade ago, where we said, okay, I'm a genius, I know what we should build. Hey, engineers, go build this. And then, 9 months later, they come out of the office with a product that typically nobody wants to use. Now we use lean startup methodologies. Now we do what's called build, measure, and learn. So building, measuring, and learning, you still have to do that, right? You still have to iterate. You still have to come up with hypotheses that you go out and test, and you will still fail. The idea here is that you fail less. You can find the answer quicker by, instead of asking, hey, what does the big boss want, right? The hippo is what we call them, the highest paid person's opinion. That's the way in most companies decision gets made. What should we build? I don't know. What does the boss say we should build? Okay, let's build that. That's stupid. Okay, no, let's build what the VCs said we should build. That's stupid. Or even, hey, let's build what the customer says we build. That's less stupid, but still not the right answer. The right answer is, let's build based on consumer psychology principles, because the fact of the matter is, people can't always tell you what they want. And if they do tell you what they want, that's not necessarily what they will actually do when it comes time to use the product. So instead of asking the boss or the VC or even the customer, we need to ask this research based on decades old studies that's grounded in these 4 principles of trigger, action, reward, investment. Then we make a hypothesis, and then we test. How do we test? We do what's called a cohort analysis. So we pick a group of users and we ask ourselves, for our installed base, what percentage of our users are currently habituated? How do we know that? That's for you to decide. So you have to ask yourself, how many days a week would a habituated user use our product? For some people, it's once a week. For some people, it's every day. For some products, it's 3 times a day. It depends on what kind of product you're building. Whatever that number is, you see what percentage of your users meet that definition. Okay, so if you're the kind of product that really, to be habituated, you would have to use it every day. Let's say you're a social network. Social networks should probably use 2 or 3 times a day. Let's say you're a meditation app. 5 times a week. That would tell us you're a habituated user. An education product, 3 or 4 times, whatever it is. You define it, see how many users are habituated, and then make a change, right? Come up with a hypothesis, change one of the 4 steps of your hook, and then see with the next cohort of users, did that percentage of habituated users go up or did it go down? And so this is what build, measuring, and learning is all about. It's that iterative process based on a model, based on a framework.
Great. So there's a question that came in about, are habits in and of themselves, so can they be used to actually create the competitive advantage for it said here, an e-commerce product or a product like Uber, when you have like several competing solutions on the market, and sometimes it tends to come down to price, for example, can habit be a source of competitive advantage?
Absolutely, absolutely. So habits are one form of competitive advantage. Now, there are lots of different competitive advantages. You can have economies of scale, you can have brand, you can have network effects, lots of different competitive advantages. You need to have one of them, right? Because if you don't have a competitive advantage, what's going to happen, you're going to compete on price and features and price and features and price and features all day long, and you're going to grind down all the excess returns. So you need some kind of competitive advantage. Habits are one type of competitive advantage. Let me prove it to you. When we have a habit, what happens is we don't even give the competitor a chance. I'll prove it to you. When I'm in a room of, let's see, we have 120 people tuning in, 191 people tuning in. When I give my talks before Corona, I used to do a lot of public speaking, and I would ask people, raise your hand if you searched with Google in the past 24 hours, right? If we were physically together, I would see almost everybody's hand go up, people who have searched with Google in the past 24 hours. And then I would ask, raise your hand if you searched with Bing in the past 24 hours. How many of you searched the number 2 search engine, Bing? Maybe 1 or 2 Microsoft employees would raise their hand. Why? Is it because Google is just so much better than Bing? No. Third-party studies have found that if you strip out the branding, okay, and people don't know which search engine is which, and you put the search results right by each other, but people don't know who's Google, who's Bing, it's a 50-50 preference split. People can't tell the difference. But why does Google own 80-90% of the search engine market? Because it's habit. When you need to search for something, when you are triggered with an internal trigger of uncertainty, you don't ask yourself, I wonder who has the best search engine. No, you don't ask yourself, is DuckDuckGo better or Bing better or Yahoo better? Who's better? No, you don't ask yourself that. You just Google it with little or no conscious thought out of habit. And so habits are a huge competitive advantage.
Okay, and then we have maybe this will be one of the last questions. Maybe, I don't know if it's a joke or if it's for real, but given the hooked model, what's the unhooked model? and I don't know, maybe it also is a good a segue to another question, which is on a personal level, at a company level, but on a personal level. Can we use any of these principles for creating our own new positive habits or to break old bad habits?
Absolutely. So great question. So my first book was called Hooked, How to Build Habit Forming Products. And it's all about how to build good habits. I mean, exactly like you said, every company I invested in and work with, these are all products that are trying to help people live better lives by changing their habits for good. I mean, look, I'm in the best shape of my life. I have closer relationships with my friends, with my family, largely because of this miracle in my pocket. Now, some of the bad aspects is that sometimes these products are so amazing, they're so good that we overuse them. And so late last year, I released a book called Indistractable, and I just put in the URL there if you want to learn more about the book. And Indistractable, if Hooked is about how to build good habits, Indistractable is about how to break bad habits. And so Hooked is for people who are building products. Indistractable is for anyone. People like me who struggled with distraction. Many of these distractions were from technology products. And at first I thought it was technology's fault, right? And so I got rid of my technology. And guess what? I was still distracted by one thing or another, right? The news or my kids or the laundry or cleaning up, something would always distract me. So I wanted to write a book about how do we essentially get unhooked from some of these distractions. It's not just technology. There are all kinds of distractions out there. And guess what? It's not technology doing it to us. There's the deeper psychology, starting with what we talked about earlier, these internal triggers. That when we understand the real reason why we get distracted, it's always about a desire to escape discomfort. That distraction and procrastination, it's still those internal triggers. The way that companies get us, whether it's towards good habits or bad habits, is by finding what is that emotional discomfort that we don't know how to deal with without using some kind of product. So whether it's too much booze, right? Too much drinking, too much news, too much football, too much Facebook. If we don't understand what we are trying to escape from, we will always find distraction one way or the other. So that's why I wanted to do this deep dive into the psychology of distraction with this new book, Indistractable.
Can't wait to read it. Thank you. Okay, let's see if there are any other final questions. Can a product address more than one negative feeling?
Yes, but not all at once. So the idea here is that these hooks build on each other. So if you, for example, Instagram is a good example of this. So Instagram, you first came to as the Instagram camera because back in the day, the filters were really novel and really interesting. And so you could make your crappy, back when iPhones, back in 2008, the first versions of iPhones, I remember this, had kind of crappy cameras. And so applying filters, you could make your pictures look pretty good. Well, that's why people first came, right? They saw a moment. There was a fear of capturing, of losing that moment. By the way, when I talked about earlier, you asked Millie about how do you find those internal triggers? And I said, look for those offline behaviors. Do you remember what Kodak's motto used to be? The Kodak moment? It's no different, right? You capture a Kodak moment because you were afraid you'd lose it forever. Same reason why people started using Instagram. But Instagram can do things that the Kodak camera never could because Instagram is a social network. So now the second hook is not just capturing the photo, it's sharing it. You use it when you're feeling lonely, bored, FOMO, fear of missing out. Now you're using it for other internal triggers. So you have new behaviors. But all of these hooks start with a keystone habit, right? With that central habit, and then build upon the next hook, and the next hook to teach users new and more complicated behaviors.
Makes sense. Okay, I know we're about to run out of time. Nir, is there anything you want to add or Any comments? Everyone is right. I don't know if you can see in the chat, but you're getting a lot of compliments and
Oh, thank you.
gratitude. So
I appreciate it. Let me, I'll type in my website here if anybody just again has any questions that we didn't get to or I can be helpful. I do those office hours every week. So visit me at nirandfar.com. And I appreciate it. Keep doing great work. Change habits for good. And yeah, good luck, everybody. Stay healthy.
well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. It's really been, I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. It's been an honor to host you, Nir, and I hope everyone here enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. We hope you guys will continue to be in touch with Joy. You have our website, and hope you'll get in touch with us. So thanks again, everyone, and stay safe. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.